policy for broadband?
I think you've touched upon the reason why we are in the position we are. We don't have a broadband policy. And that systemically is driving down into the state and local level for government entities to grasp this for themselves and come up on a localized level of policy. And, you know, that's fighting an uphill battle against existing policy, existing law, FCC, and certainly long established traditions and tenets within the telecommunications industry. It's easier for the countries that are federally based to begin with. You know, you're standing in Kuala Lumpur, you're dealing with a government that is largely our equivalent of federal without any state and local. And so to declare or decree policy there is much easier. I don't think that we'll find an easy way to crawl out from under it, but I think we can get guidance if the federal government will embrace this and start down the path of laying down guidelines and standards in order that we don't just create new clouds, but we don't also create at the same time the next generation of digital silos. We've come out of that in data. We're heading into it to some degree in this world of wireless. That can be prevented. That's something that, even absent the federal government's guidance, you know, the onus is on the communities and organizations just like this in order to facilitate that dialogue and make sure that we don't go down the path.
I would also say to some extent it comes down to what do you fundamentally consider broadband to be? Do you consider it to be an amenity, a service, or do you consider it to be a utility? If you go the latter route, utility, which is certainly what I consider it to be, which is kind of something that's fundamentally necessary to everybody to live their daily lives, then you have a couple of things that you can look at. Past models that we've used in the US, that's the railways, the roadways, and electricity. If you look at some of the roadways and electricity, here are two interesting and salient models that come from the federal government. The first being the Eisenhower interstate system, where we didn't have the money at the federal level to build an interstate roadway that connected everything. So what they did was they built stretches of asphalt in the middle of nowhere between cities and said, if you want to be connected, you'll have to build from your city out to that roadway. We can do the same thing. What we've talked about here is the need for fiber infrastructure at the backhaul internet level and at the metro access level. If the federal government comes in and says, we're going to build or assist in building the high-speed backhaul connections, but you've got to do the metro access connection, then you've got a lot of the equation there. The other way to do it is to create a rural electrification agency, or the equivalent of, and go out and the people, the 45% or so of Americans that don't have what the FCC defines as broadband, which is about 256 kilobit per second connections.
200.
200.
In one direction.
200 asymmetrical. Create an agency whose sole duty is to go out and make sure that everybody has a higher speed connection. That if we say this is a utility and this is something that's critical for everybody to live their daily lives, which is what India is doing, which is what Malaysia is doing, all of the countries that we are starting to find ourselves competing with for jobs, when you start to define that, then you can create an agency that's sole goal is to go out and do this. In Massachusetts, I would cite the Mass Tech Collaborative, MTC, as starting to play some of this role. They're doing it with solar, they're basically a statewide economic development agency. But we can also do this at the federal level. And that will allow us to get purchasing power, and it'll allow us to smooth over a lot of the issues that we cited here about rights of way issues, about problems negotiating with other service providers that we need, like the electrical companies, and getting that if we have a higher level. One thing, I would go one step further and say maybe...
Real short if you can.
Real short, yeah. Maybe we need a Department of Telecommunications. Is the FCC enough?
Okay, I'd like to follow up on that quickly, and in keeping with my reputation for never knowing when to not say something, the FCC is where we really should be talking about at this point. The first thing I would suggest is we need to return to a time when the FCC was controlled by technical people and engineers and stop politicizing it. The rule for the FCC was that our airwaves were supposed to be used for the benefit of the American public, and I honestly don't believe that means selling spectrum at billions of dollars that we end up paying for back to the cell phone companies or what have you. I want to see our spectrum freed up, and I want to see our spectrum turned back in for this infrastructure, and I would really appreciate it if they would stop playing games with our future. Take that for what it's worth.
So, and I'd also differentiate between a national broadband policy and a strategy. So I think you need a strategy first. And actually at the state level, I think California has a broadband task force that's actually trying to define a strategy for the state. Like, what do you want to do and where do you want to go? And then policy is actually how it makes its way into laws and regulations. But I would focus first on what are we trying to accomplish? And especially at the state level, I think is where a tremendous amount of the activity is. Please identify yourself.
Yes, I'm curious to know if any of this can be done without using more tax dollars and creating a national utility. I'm from a town of 25,000 and would love to do MuniWireless, but we don't want to use any city resources. We want to know, is there a way to do this without using city tax dollars to build community centers, et cetera?
Okay.
I'm going to take that one again because I don't know when to shut up. Actually, I think you want to use tax dollars, and I know that may be, the wrong way to start off by saying this, but if you want to build a road, you don't decide